All right, so we are being recorded. So welcome everyone. We are here today for the Gull ID talk with Amar Ayyash. He was here last night and presented his great keynote, Man and Gull. And today we are excited about the Gull ID workshop. So real quick, Amar is both an expert on gull identification and an evangelist for gull recreation. He hosts several popular websites devoted to gulling, has published various technical articles on gull ID, molt, and range shifts. He serves on the board of directors of the Illinois Ornithological Society and coordinates the annual Gull Frolic. Amar is a well-known speaker and blogger and can usually be found at birding events and festivals throughout the continent. He lives in Northern Illinois and does much of his gull watching in the Lake Michigan region. Besides supplementing the need to ramble about this fascinating family of birds, his primary objective in maintaining his blog, anythinglaris.com, is to advance gull recreation in North America. And today we are excited to learn more about gull identification techniques. So with that, I am gonna turn it over to Amar. I'm gonna make him the spotlight for us here. So hopefully everybody sees Amar, and with that, we'll get started. If you have any questions, please remember to go ahead and put them in the chat. Unlike last night, Amar will try to answer those questions as he goes along, and if I catch anything that he doesn't see, we will ask those questions. So we're excited to get started.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I hope you can hear me well on your end. Katie, how do I sound on your end there?
You sound good to me.
Excellent, excellent. So introduction to Gull ID. I wish I had some way of seeing everybody's face, because ordinarily I would ask how many of you have spent at least 10 hours of your lifetime watching gulls, and how many of you have never ever approached a gull flock like this. So I'm not able to do that, but I'm going to assume everybody has some interest in gull identification or you wouldn't be here. What you're seeing on this cover slide is primarily ring-billed gulls. Ring-billed gulls are medium-sized gulls. And I think this is a great species to begin with. If you're not familiar with ring-billed gull, you definitely should be, because this is one of our most widespread gulls in North America. Medium size, it's not small, it's not big. Yellow legs, gray back as an adult, a light gray back, and of course it has that bold black ring on the bill tip. But aside from the ring-billed gulls that you see in the foreground, there's 4 other species in this slide. There is a hooded gull, a Franklin's gull. There's also an Iceland gull in this flock. There's a young lesser blackback gull. And there's a bunch of herring gulls in the back, some of the bigger birds that you're seeing in the back. So maybe just take a moment to gauge yourself here, and how much of what I just said there are you able to point out? Do you see a Franklin's? Do you see a lesser blackback? Do you see an Iceland gull? So the Franklin's gull's right here, this little guy with the hood. The lesser blackback gull is right here. That's a first cycle or a juvenile lesser blackback gull. Notice it has a pretty pale breast, solid brown upper parts, this jet black bill. That's a lesser blackback gull, and it's highly underreported in North America, mainly because many people aren't familiar with them yet. They're more familiar with the adults. And where's the Iceland gull? The Iceland gull is, my mouse actually just stopped working. Okay, I got it. It's back. I think it's back. Sorry, folks. This is not the time you want your mouse to stop working. All right, so I'll use the mouse pad here, but the Iceland gull is actually right above the lesser blackback gull. It's that creamy bird that you see. Looks like it has a black tip to the bill. Boy, okay, that gave me a good scare there. Got my mouse back. So here's our Iceland gull. These are paler birds. They're about herring size, but they're by far our palest of the large gulls. I think it's probably time to go to another slide here. I'm going to put this quote up as I figure out exactly what's happening with this mouse of mine. Maybe you can relate. I don't know. Are gulls the Gordian knot of bird identification? In some ways they are, but they don't have to be. I think if you approach gulls with the right mindset, that sometimes the amount of variation that you're going to find is outside of what you see in your field guides, and that's expected, then I think you won't be as troubled by them. But you definitely want to be able to step away from your field guide sometimes and say, yeah, Sibley says great blackback gulls have pink legs, but here's one with yellowish legs. That sometimes happens. It happens in up to 2 to 3% of adult great blackback gulls. Glaucous wing gulls are said to have dark eyes, but there's about 1% of them that have pale eyes. And these are the things gull nuts sort of obsess over. They obsess over the exceptions. And most birders don't like to obsess over the exceptions. They want the bird to look exactly as it appears in the field guide. But if you're able to widen your goalposts a little bit and allow for some variation, I think gulls can be fun. So if I see these three birds on a beach or anywhere in North America, I should have some expectations for what these are. These are really, really good benchmark species. We have small, medium, large. And these are our three most widespread small, medium, large gulls. Any guesses on what this big one would be? Pink legs. It looks like it has a pale eye. This one is a herring gull. In the middle here, that medium-sized gull that I talked about at the beginning, yellow legs, mustard yellow legs, ring-billed gull. And this smallest one here with these brownish red legs, that's a small tern-like gull. That's a Bonaparte's gull. Now you may say, wow, you're really good. You can identify these birds without even seeing their bills. And that's kind of risky, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is we can make assumptions based on probabilities. Herring gulls are so common, as well as ring-billed and Bonapartes. These are wonderful benchmark species to know. Herring gull, large, ring-billed, medium size, and Bonapartes, small. So you have them there at the top of this table. Bonaparte's is a 2-year gull, ring-billed is a 3-year gull, and herring is a 4-year gull. When you begin with gulls, it's probably best to take on adults first. So the birds that you saw in the previous slide are all adults. And once you get the adults down, you can start to think about the juveniles, the first cycle birds. But Bonapartes, you typically are looking at 2 different plumages. Ring-billed gulls, in general, come in 3 different plumages, and herring gulls come in 4 different plumages. So if you do the multiplication, that's a lot of plumages for the species that are just on this table here. But again, a good approach is to begin with adults, and once you're comfortable with adults, you move on to some of the younger groups. And the reason why that's a good idea is because adults tend to be most uniform in plumages. Once you get to the younger birds, there's quite a bit of variation in their plumages. So taxonomy, if you attended a talk last night, you know that there's 11 genera among the gulls. The biggest genus is Laris. Laris has things like ring-billed gull in there, herring gull, great blackback gulls, the Iceland gulls, western gulls. All those big 4-year species are part of Laris, as well as some of the 3-year species. The smaller gulls, like this little gull that you see here with the black hood, those are all 2-year gulls. And if you're not familiar with these two species here, you could probably guess, throw your dart on the board and you'd probably be right. The one on the left is the biggest gull species in the world. That's a great blackback gull, Laris marinus. And the one on the right is the little gull. That's our smallest gull species, Hydrocolloius minutus. Little gull has a hood in breeding plumage, and its closest relative, Ross's gull, these are sometimes placed in the same genus. Ross's gull doesn't have a hood, it has a necklace. Ross's is an Arctic breeder, very, very rare bird. Little gull breeds on the Great Lakes, northern Great Lakes, the tundra, and they're not as rare as Ross's gull, but they are still pretty difficult to see. Looking at this collage here, I wonder if a novice birder, somebody who's not very familiar with gulls, can look at a collage like this and try to sort these birds into 2 or 3 groups, because there are 3 groups here. There are small tern-like birds like 2B and 3C. Does everybody see 2B and 3C? There's something special about their bills, right? They're definitely different, these small pointed bills, and they appear to have earmuffs. Both of them have these ear spots. So 2B is a Bonaparte's gull. It has an all black bill. 3C is a black-headed gull, just a smidgen larger than Bonaparte's. They have that blackish red bill in the non-breeding season. But right above them, between them, kitty corner to them, 2C, this guy here. Okay, this is going to keep happening. Sorry about that. 2C right here. Sorry, guys. This fellow right here. So a little bit of a thicker bill, all black bill though. It appears to have signs of an ear spot. That's a laughing gull in non-breeding plumage. So these 3 that I've circled here are not part of Laris. All the other ones are part of Laris. They're the white-headed gulls. They tend to have yellow bills with red spots for the most part. Some of them are dark-eyed, some of them are pale-eyed. But if you can pick out the small tern-like gulls and the laughing gull, then I think you're definitely on your way. Laughing gull would be by far probably the most common one for you guys on the Virginia coast. They don't go too far inland. They're mainly coastal. And their feeding habits are much like ring-billed gulls. They hang out on beaches, they scavenge, they take handouts. This is what some of these species look like as juveniles. These are all juvenile birds here. They're not necessarily in the same places as they were in a previous slide, but there's one small tern-like gull here. Actually, there's 2 of them, excuse me. There's 2 tern-like gulls here, smaller gulls, 2-year gulls. 2A is one of them. Is this a Bonaparte's gull? Because it seems to look like one. Actually has a smaller bill than a Bonaparte's gull. That's a little gull. Bonaparte's is up here at 1B. But notice the bill size, notice the bill shape compared to some of those larger gulls. Your laughing gull is right here, same spot as the last slide. This is what they look like as juveniles. They have kind of these brownish mottled heads, still a black bill. You may wonder about this fellow here, 4B, has a really small, tiny bill. That's a mew gull. Mew gulls are mainly Western species, but they do have some of the shortest bills of all our gulls. Sometimes they're even referred to as the short-billed gull by Europeans. Right above it is a black-legged kittiwake. Black-legged kittiwakes have nice black hind collars. If you see that black semi-necklace there, That's what those fellows look like in juvenile plumage. So what about all the other ones? Those are large 4-year species. They kind of become a blur without having more details to their plumages, but I'll show you this one here. It has a pretty sharply bicolored bill. You guys might know this one. This is a glaucous gull juvenile with this pink bill base and a black tip. All right, so I've been using this terminology, small tern-like gulls, if you're not familiar with the term. These are the 2-year species. They're in their own genus. They're not related as much to the bigger 4-year species. They're much more tern-like in behavior. They don't have forked tails except for the Sabin's gull, but they do behave much like terns. They're very pelagic. They're not as terrestrial as the larger gulls, and they're agile flyers. They're quite nimble. So one of these birds is a tern, and one of these birds is a gull. One of these birds is a tern, and one of these birds is a gull. So the tern has longer wings. This is what I mean by longer wings. It has short legs. Of course, you can't see the legs of the gull, unfortunately, but these are some of the differences. Somebody asked this last night, what's the difference between a tern and a gull? Terns are much more pelagic. Terns have much more restricted diets. They're not as opportunistic as gulls. Gulls have a much more varied diet. Terns have more narrow wings, pointed wings, forked tails. They do a lot of diving in the water. Gulls don't do much of that as much as terns, I should say. I saw a question in the chat there. Somebody said 2-year, 3-year, 4-year. What does this mean? 2-year gulls acquire adult plumage within 2 years. That's what that means. A 3-year gull takes 3 years to acquire adult plumage. So they begin kind of brown and mottled and patterned like this. And then by the time they become adults, they take on their grayish backs, their whitish heads. So when I say 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, this means the number of years it takes to acquire an adult-like plumage and to begin breeding. They generally begin breeding when they're adults. All right, these are all adult gulls here, okay? They happen to be 2-year species. They're very, very striking. Again, little gull is right here with the black hood. The two on top there, Ross's, is very rare. Ivory is another Arctic breeder, very, very rare birds. If you've been birding for a while, you probably know how rare these two are. Sabin's gull with the black hood here, yellow tip to the bill. This is a trans-equatorial migrant, very, very tern-like. In fact, when it's found, it's usually found with terns. It's highly pelagic. They cross the equator. Every year, they make 2 migrations across the equator. I showed this slide last night, so sorry for folks who've heard this already. Sabin's gulls breed in the Arctic, some of them in the high tundra, and then they migrate in the fall to South America and some of them to Southern Africa. The map that you're seeing here is from a study that was conducted a few years ago where they fitted GPS trackers on a few birds, and they tagged a male-female pair that they actually found used different migration pathways to get to the wintering grounds. So the male took the Pacific Ocean, ended up in Peru and Chile, and the female took the Atlantic Ocean along the European and African coasts and ended up in Namibia and Africa. The following breeding season, these birds migrated back north to the same colony. They regrouped, paired up again, and nested just a few feet away from where they bred the previous year. First documentation of this happening where male, female take on different migratory pathways and then regroup and find each other again and nest in the same colony. So these are Sabin's gulls, and they're one of our longest migrating gulls in the world. Yeah, they do have webbed feet. They definitely are webbed feet, and This makes it really hard for them to handle fish on the water surface. We spoke a little bit about that last night. It's very hard for them actually to handle anything. Most food and prey that gets picked up with the bill, gets picked with the bill. Um, are they lifetime mates? Some species are said to be, some it's kind of random. But ring-billed gulls, I know for a fact, pair up for life. Some western gulls do as well, but some appear to be random. So I don't think they all do the same thing across all species. These are 3 different species: little Bonapartes, black-legged kittiwake, striking birds. 2 of them are hooded. The little gull has this diagnostic black underwing. You ever see anything like this in flight? It's got to be a little gull. The entire underwing is black here, the underside to the flight feathers. It has no black pigment on the upper wing. If you look at the far wing over here, it's all just gray and white. It doesn't have any white eye arcs, so you can hardly see the eye when it has that black hood. This is breeding plumage, also known as alternate plumage, the alternate plumage. Bonaparte's gull. This is one I would definitely know if I'm just starting to get into gulls, because you're more likely to see Bonapartes than these other 2 species. Bonaparte's takes on a hood. It has this white wedge on the forewing, a little bit of black on the trailing edge. This is called the trailing edge. Kittiwake, not too hard of a species. They have this interesting kind of greenish yellow bill. They don't have any white in the wingtip. It's just a black triangle that looks like it was dipped in ink. Black-legged kittiwake happens to be the most abundant gull species in the world. I think there's something like 14 million pairs, or 14 million individuals in the world. Black-legged kittiwake is a highly pelagic species, much more than little gull and Bonaparte's gull. This is what these birds look like in their first cycle. So they're under a year old here, probably just several months old. Little gull is species A, Bonaparte's, B for Bonaparte's, and the kittiwake is species C there. They all have this interesting M pattern across the wing. If you read in your field guide, they call this the M pattern. But there are some differences, right? And our field guides do a pretty good job of explaining these differences, but I'll just point out a few things. Kittiwake doesn't have any black along the trailing edge. That's an all white wing, okay? Bonaparte's has black all throughout the trailing edge, from the body all the way to the wingtip, okay? And little gull's kind of in the middle. Sometimes it has more black, sometimes it has less black, but it's somewhere between kittiwake and Bonaparte. Size-wise, this guy's the largest. Kittiwakes are almost ring-billed gull size. Sorry, that's large. This guy is medium, and this is, of course, our little gull, so he's smallest. Look how bold the M pattern is on the little gull. It's really striking, and this is usually how people pick out little gulls, not so much by their size, but by that striking, bold M pattern. This is also known as a carpal bar, okay? Just across this region here, this is the carpal bar, and little gull by far has the thickest of them all. Bonaparte's has a little break in the front here. If you see these headlights, National Geographic points that out in the field guide. They have the headlights in the front. So these are fun birds. Lots of times you see them in flight rather than perched on a beach because they're nimble flyers and they're always on the wing. See a question in the chat here.
Yeah, are they pelagic? Someone wanted to know if these are pelagic.
Yeah, black-legged kittiwake for sure is pelagic. They spend most of their life out on the ocean when they're not nesting. But you can occasionally encounter black-legged kittiwakes inland. We do see several reports of them every year, and I think that's just because there's so many of them in the world. Usually when they're found inland, they're lost younger birds like this here with the thick black hind collar. but they do spend most of the non-breeding season offshore. Little gull and Bonapartes, not so much. They enjoy fresh water as well as salt water. So in this shot here, we have black-headed gulls. You don't see any black-headed gulls here because they're non-breeding plumage. Non-breeding plumage is also known as basic plumage. So all of these birds are in basic plumage. There's nothing really special about this plumage as opposed to their alternate plumage. So which ones are black-headed gulls and which ones are Bonaparte's gulls? Again, we're going to be seeing Bonaparte's gulls more than black-headed gulls. BOGU means Bonaparte's gull. Okay. The other ones, the black-headed gulls, are a little bit bigger and they have black on the under primaries. These are the primaries, right? The 10 flight feathers found on this wing. And black-headed gull has black on the underside of the primaries. That, in addition to the red bill, I think makes them pretty straightforward to pick out. You folks on the Atlantic see these black-headed gulls on a fairly regular basis. They become much more rare when you get to the Great Lakes and the interior. I wouldn't be surprised if there's one in every state along the Atlantic right now as we speak. Moving on, we have 3-year gulls. These are hooded species, but they don't have their hoods because they're in basic plumage. The one on the right is your most common hooded species. This is a laughing gull. Laughing gulls have medium gray upper parts. These aren't pale gray upper parts. We say these are medium gray. They have this long kind of droopy bill, as opposed to this Franklin's gull here. This is a Franklin's on the left. You don't get many Franklins on the Atlantic, but you do sometimes in October after a nice westerly storm. They'll push through and eventually get lost and end up on the Atlantic. But if you've ever been in the interior, anywhere from the Dakotas, Wyoming, Colorado, Texas, all down the interior, the Great Plains and south, you'll see Franklin's gulls. And Franklin's gulls also have medium gray upper parts. They're about the size of a laughing gull, maybe a little bit smaller. Their bills are also smaller. But in flight, if I have birds like this, if you look in your field guide, they'll point out this medial band. And this is the medial band right here. It's this white partition that you see between the gray and the black wingtip. Laughing gull never has white there. It's just black and then gray. Whereas Franklin's gulls go from gray, one white buffer, and then black there. Okay, nice thing to know for gulls in flight. I do wonder how many people have seen Franklin's gull. If you're an East Coast resident and if you've been on the East Coast your whole life, what is your experience with Franklin's? So Franklin's here on the left. This is a juvenile Franklin's or first cycle Franklin's. It's under a year old. And laughing gull on the right. I think it would make more sense for you to know laughing gull. And if you know laughing gull well, because it is your common species, you'd probably be able to pick out a Franklin's if you saw it among a group of laughing gulls. So laughing gulls tend to be a little more narrow-winged, longer-winged, but look at the tail patterns. These are really, really good comparisons. Laughing gull has a dark tail all the way up to the outer tail feathers, whereas Franklin's gull has kind of this narrow band, and the black doesn't reach all the way out to the outermost tail feathers. Doesn't reach to those outer edges of the outer tail feathers. So that's a great field mark in flight. Also notice on the Franklin's gull, the black on the back of the hood, it's this nice sharply demarcated line. So it's just like black and then gray. And that doesn't really happen in laughing gull. Compare the bills here. I think that's a real comparison there. I would say this is to scale. The laughing gull has this longer, kind of droopy looking bill. Franklin's not so much. And then the last thing I'll say about this, these are called eye crescents. Franklin's gull is known to have thicker eye crescents. It's a very, very good field mark for both first cycle birds and for adults. Even in breeding plumage, those adult Franklins will show thicker eye crescents than laughing gulls. All right, on to some of the more interesting stuff. Those are the smaller 2-year, 3-year species. And now we'll talk about some of the large white-headed gulls. The large white-headed gulls, also known as the typical gulls, your seagull, if you will, gull gray back, white head, yellow beak. This is what most ordinary people would think of when they think of seagulls or gulls. There are some subtle differences in these species, sometimes night and day differences. These two that you're seeing here on this slide sort of look like one another, but there are differences. And I'll just let you point out some of those differences before I talk about them. Yeah, eye color for sure, definitely. That's important with large gulls. Somebody said tail spots. We'll talk about that. Okay. Flatter head on the guy in the back there. That could be sex related. We'll talk about head shape with males versus females. So bill thickness, these are the subtle things you're looking for when you're identifying large gulls. Don't underestimate bill size. Don't underestimate the shape of the head. But someone said tail spots, and I want to talk about that. So this black that you're seeing here, these are actually the primaries. These are the wingtips. So when the bird has its wings open, the farthest most feathers on the very, very wingtip is what you're seeing here. And many people, beginning birders especially, confuse this for the tail, right? Because that's where we visualize the tail should be. But the tail is actually white and it's sitting right here. It's this square region. We'll get a better view of that in just a moment. But the black that you're seeing there are the primaries. Those are the wingtips. And the one in the back here is a herring gull. It has jet black primaries. This guy in the front is an Iceland gull. And they tend to have kind of these slaty gray, not so black primaries, depending on the subspecies. Some are darker than others, some are paler than others. But you guys get the Kumleoni subspecies of Iceland gull, Kumleoni subspecies of Iceland gull, and they usually have these slaty gray wingtips, less than jet black, let's say. If you're not familiar with GBBG, this is great blackback gull, and LBBG is lesser blackback gull. Both of those species are found on the Atlantic. In fact, Virginia has the North American high count of the number of lesser blackback gulls recorded in one day, at one time, at one site. So 700, and I'm probably off here, but I believe it was 768 or 758. It was in the mid 700s, and that's pretty extraordinary. So moving on here, when you approach large white-headed gulls, I think some of you are on to me already, you want to make sure you allow for variation. I should also mention you should allow for variation. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention you should allow for variation. Okay, I think I've made my point there. You know, you post a photo on Facebook and you say, hey, I have this really neat bird. I don't think it's a herring gull. And then 5 people reply back, it's a herring gull. It just has yellowish legs, that's fine. Or it just has darkish eyes, that's fine. The more you allow for variation, especially with bare parts, the bare parts are things like legs, bill color, eye color. The more you allow for variation there, I think the more comfortable you'll become with gulls. So this isn't variation. These are 2 different species that you're seeing in the center of the slide here. Kind of the same thing we went through a couple slides ago. You'll notice eye color is different. Here I'm noticing leg color is different. But also I noticed the gray on the back is different, right? And I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think there's a real difference in gray, right? And even these subtle differences here shouldn't be overlooked when you're scanning a gull flock. The guy in the front here with the dark eye and yellow legs is a California gull. And all the other ones with the pale eyes and pink legs are herring gulls. So your default species being in the east would be herring gull, right? So you want to know the pink-legged bird with the pale eye. California gull is found in the Great Plains, the Great Basin, and all throughout the West Coast. But they're starting to increase in the Great Lakes. They're starting to increase on the East Coast, mainly because birders are starting to learn them and they're starting to look through these herring flocks and they're finding them. There's some size variation in California gulls. Some of them are smaller than herrings. Some of them are just about herring size, and that's what you're seeing with this bird here. Again, the same two that we saw. I don't think you can see it in this slide, and I apologize. This guy has a purplish eye ring, and this guy has an orange eye ring. That's another thing to look at if you can ever zoom in or get your scope on them and examine the orbital ring. It's called an orbital ring. If you have an interesting bird and it has a pinkish or purple or yellow or orange orbital ring, take note of that orbital ring when you're taking your field notes. Size variation in large white-headed gulls. This doesn't really apply to the smaller gulls. This applies to our 4-year species and some of our 3-year species. Males are about 15 to 30% larger than females. These are both ring-billed gulls, and we have to assume the one on the right is a male, one on the left is a female. These are both great blackback gulls, our largest gull species in the world. Really dark black backs. I'm sure you have seen them on the Atlantic. Pink legs, we said. If you look at the bills, I want you to compare the bill size, the bill girth. Are you able to sex these birds? We would say that this one is a male and this one's probably the female, just based on how stout and thick that bill is on the male. The female tends to have kind of a more gentle head, maybe a longer bill, but it's definitely a thinner bill. And the fact that it's a thinner bill makes it more likely that it's a female. Oh, wow. Here's a size difference. And I don't know if this is sex related at all. These two are herring gulls. That's an adult herring gull. This one is a first cycle herring gull. Okay, it's kind of this nondescript mottled brown. Nothing really special about it. It's just a first cycle herring gull. Whereas this big creamy bird, huge, ginormous bird, before I say what it is, maybe you can make a mental note of what you think it is. Has that bicolored bill that I talked about in one of the first slides. Really pink bill base, black tip. Does have kind of a small eye for the face, but the plumage is just unmistakable. This is a glaucous gull. Glaucous gull is the second largest gull species in the world. This one's a monster, so we're probably looking at a male, and it definitely towers over the herring gulls. You do get glaucous gulls on the Atlantic every winter. They're uncommon, but they're regular. Here's another glaucous gull. This is pretty interesting because in this slide, it looks like it's about the same size as the herring gull. What is that all about? Compare this glaucous gull to this glaucous gull. Definitely some size variation. This can trip someone up who's used to seeing big glaucous gulls. So this is probably a female glaucus. That's my best bet. And the one in the previous slide is probably a male glaucus. Okay, that's a good explanation for that. Allow for variation with size. The only other thing this glaucous gull might be confused with is Iceland gull. A lot of the Iceland gulls have kind of this marbled, creamy pattern to their upper parts. But this bill pattern is all glaucous gull here. The Iceland gulls tend to keep blacker bills in the winter. Both herring gulls, this is a pretty amazing comparison. This is an adult herring. And the other one is a second cycle herring. It's not a first cycle herring gull. meaning it's not a first-year herring gull. It has a pale eye. I don't know if you can make that out. The bill's already bicolored, so first cycles usually have dark eyes. They have a little more black on the bill in general, and they don't show all this gray on the wing panel. Okay, so this is a second-year herring with an adult herring. These are very, very common species on the Atlantic seaboard. But check out the size difference there. That is a real size difference. I don't think it's a camera effect. The herring gull on the right is standing on a plank that's higher than the one on the left there. So it even has an advantage with height, but it still appears smaller than the bird on the left. Size variation. Like I said, some gull ID with 4 gulls is night and day, black and white. You have blackbacks and you have white wingers. This is a glaucous gull. That's an adult. No pigment on the wingtip, all white wingtip. And notice the gray on the back. The gray on the back is noticeably paler than the gray on the other birds. Glaucous gull is one of our palest gulls. And when you see one, you know immediately this looks different. This guy's a lesser blackback gull. I don't think it's a great blackback gull because I would expect a great blackback gull to be even bigger than that glaucous. So we'll be okay with calling this one a lesser blackback. And all these other ones are herring gulls. Okay, herring gull being the most common that you're going to find in the East. You have a nice variety of what we call white wingers and blackbacks with the typical gray gull colored birds there. 4 different species in this slide. Boy, the lesser blackback sticks out like a sore thumb as an adult, right? Yellow legs, black back. But what are some of these other ones here? This is one I would definitely know, the herring gull. How do I know that's a herring gull? Well, let's start with it has a pale eye, pink legs, and the gray upper parts are not medium gray, but they're also not as pale as glaucous gull. So this is a pale gray, but it's not medium, okay? These other ones on the top here appear to have slightly darker gray upper parts. Check out the dark-eyed bird here. That I would definitely want to take note of. It's a dark eye, but also look at the leg color. Leg color is very important with large 4-year gulls. It has kind of these sickly gray, greenish yellow legs. That's a California gull. And California gulls, like I said, are somewhat rare in the East, but they're becoming regular. California gulls have darker gray upper parts. The one I really want you to know is the top left bird. Notice its wingtips. This top left bird, notice the wingtips there, the black wingtips. Are they as black? Do they have as much pigment as the herring gull? All right, this is one thing, folks who are used to looking at large gulls, one of the first places their eyes go is right here. What's going on with the black on the wingtip? And that to me doesn't look like a herring pattern. Seems like there's a good amount of white coming up the edge. Let me put my eraser back here and show you exactly what it is I would be looking for. Right here, it looks like there's white coming along the edges of those wingtips. Whereas in herring, it's just solid black here. Okay. The other thing to take note of is it has a dark eye. I would be surprised if an adult herring gull had a dark eye. Here on the underside of the far wing, I see a lot of white there. I know this seems a little like splitting hairs, but that wingtip pattern is what many gull watchers will obsess over, knowing that there might be some variation in eye color, there might be some variation in leg color. When you look at the wingtip there, that tells a big part of the story. So those 4 species look like this as first cycle birds, right? So here they are as adults, and same exact species in the same exact position as first cycles, okay? And this is why we say it's best to take on adults, because um, once you get down the size and structure of the adult, that carries over to these first cycles and second cycles, because they're all more or less the same size regardless of age. So once you feel out the size and structure and you get that down from adults, that carries over from first cycles. So yeah, no more waiting. This is definitely an Iceland gull. Okay, I hope you were able to guess that if you were wondering. This is an Iceland gull. It appears to be from the darker subspecies, Thayer's gull. Notice the wingtips, they're not really jet black, they're kind of brownish here, and they have some pale chevrons on the tips. The upper parts look pretty marbled and nicely patterned. They have all these intricate patterns here. When we say upper parts, guys, we're talking about all this, right? These are the upper parts. And it seems just a little more interesting than some of the other patterns I'm seeing on these other birds. It has a short, petite bill, kind of this gentle head. In general, Iceland gulls look a little more innocent, a little more petite than herring gulls. Herring gulls look a little more deep-breasted. This is what we mean by having a deep breast, this protruding breast, if you will. Darker primaries on the herring gull. Okay, and then herring gulls, they do all sorts of things with their bill color. This guy has a mixture of black and pink on the bill. Sometimes they're all black, sometimes they become bicolored. So lots of variation in the bill of first cycle herrings. Notice the lesser blackback gull. I would love for you guys to become familiar with this age group of lesser blackbacks. I'm sure if you found an adult, you'd probably be able to pick it out. Let's go back and see what the adult looked like. Really dark black back, yellow legs, right? But the first cycles are being overlooked, I think, by lots of people. They tend to have these checkered upper parts. It's like a very, very nice, crisp, checkered pattern. Their breast and underparts seem to be paler white than the other guys. It has this jet black bill, this kind of tubular bill, this long straight bill, some fine head streaking. It's almost like someone took a sharp pencil and just did small streaks on the head, as well as the neck. You can see those neck streaks. They're very fine. Notice the back of the body here. The wingtips have this conical shape, a very long wing projection. I hope the next time you have a flock of large gulls on your hands, you're looking for these young, lesser blackback gulls, because I know they're on the Atlantic. You definitely are seeing them in places like Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. Great bird to become familiar with. They are a mystery in North America. They don't breed anywhere, at least that we know of, in Canada or the United States, but yet there's hundreds and hundreds of them found all throughout the United States and Canada every year. Closest place is Greenland. Closest nesting place for lesser blackback gulls right now stands to be Greenland. Topography. I could sit here and talk to you about leg color and eye color for another 30, 40 minutes, but I think if we don't point out some of these feather tracks, it'll be increasingly difficult for you to learn gulls. You know, gull watchers have sort of this jargon that a lot of birders aren't familiar with, mainly because it's not used with things like warblers and raptors and shorebirds. So the primaries are an important feather group. All birds have primaries. These are the longest flight feathers. And some people mistake this for the tail, but it's the longest flight feathers that sit over the tail. The tail is right here, this square piece of feathers underneath the primaries. You'll often hear people reference tertials. These are the tertials right here. And then there's scapulars. Scapulars on the back. Some people call this the mantle, but the scapulars are actually separate from the mantle. The mantle is the back proper. The scapulars are the feathers that sit on top of the back. You should know that there's 3 sets of wing coverts or coverts. What do these wing coverts do? They've streamlined the flight. They protect the flight feathers. And there's 3 groups of them in general. There's greater, median, and lesser coverts. And if you're reading your Peterson guide and it says checkered greater coverts, they're talking about this here. Lesser coverts, that's these groups up here. And median coverts, just remember, in the middle, okay? Maybe we should do a quiz here. Quizzes are fun, aren't they? Are eye stripes or eye lines uncommon? In general, they're not really bold. We don't really see them like we do in some of the sparrows and warblers, but California gull tends to show this post-ocular line as a young bird, even some of the adults. This faint kind of blackish line, but it's kind of random. It's not as consistent. Some individuals show it more than others, but there are some species who show hints of a post-ocular line, and it could be helpful, but it's definitely not a diagnostic field mark. All right, so if this was a classroom, I'd be able to hear all of you and you'd all be participating, but here we go. This feather track, greater coverts. This one here, the scapulars, right here, this little square piece, that's the tail. These feathers here are the tertials. I don't know, let's make this tricky. Right here in the middle are the median coverts. The primaries, there's 10 of those, and the lesser coverts, okay? There's other things we can talk about, like the vent region. This vent region is sometimes helpful. This happens to be a lesser blackback gull, guys. And notice the vent region is pretty pale. Herring gulls tend to be more brown here. And that's really what you would be comparing these lesser blackback gulls to on the East Coast. You'd be comparing this to a herring gull and be asking, why isn't this a herring gull? Herring gulls tend to have more checkered and patterned brown vents in this region here, okay? And they tend not to have as neatly patterned upper parts. This bird has some pretty crisp, dark brown upper parts, whereas herring is a bit more contrasty, a bit more messy, not as nice looking as most of these lesser blackback gulls. Iceland gull on the left, I think we've seen this bird already today, the brownish primaries versus on herring gull has these blackish primaries. But notice again, the tertials on Iceland, they have kind of this nice, neatly patterned marble pattern. Herrings have kind of more solid brown tertials. Okay, so you want to start from the back and then go to the front, look at the bills. The herring looks like it has a thicker bill. It's starting to pale at the base. Yeah, we're getting the first cycles. I know it's a few minutes from 4 o'clock here, and I really wanted to show an open wing here, and I think I'll end with the open wing. If you're reading any type of identification literature, any articles, or following these discussions online, you should know what P stands for. P stands for primaries, and we number the primaries from the innermost primary, P1, and we work our way out to the 10th primary. So when you hear birders say P10 is such and such, or P9, think of the outermost flight feathers. P1 is on the inside here. And, you know, gulls are so large and out in the open. If you have a good camera or good binoculars, you can usually tell where P1 begins because it contrasts with the secondaries. This first secondary that you see right here usually has a different shape, a different pattern than the first primary. So there's some contrast between S1 and P1. Okay, this is the divide here between the secondaries and the primaries. We don't typically count the secondaries. They vary depending on species. You know, smaller species like Bonapartes have about 16. The larger species have more. So But all gulls, all birds have 10 primaries. And we do talk about primaries a lot when we're focusing on gulls. If you remember those tertials a few minutes ago, these things right here, these tertials right here that sit between the upper parts and the primaries, those tertials, when the wing opens up, actually sit right here. They're the innermost secondaries. So this is the body right here, right? The tertials are the innermost secondaries. Some people don't refer to them as secondaries, but they do sit right next to the body. You can see the coverts or the coverts. They sit over the flight feathers like shingles. These coverts protect the flight feathers. That's their job. They also streamline the wing. If they weren't there, there'd be a bunch of gaps between the flight feathers at their shafts, and it'd be impossible to fly. So these coverts they have multi-use. They protect the flight feathers, and many of them are replaced twice every year, whereas the flight feathers are replaced once every year. Let me say that again, because I think that's a pretty fascinating tidbit. These coverts, many of them are replaced twice every year, and the flight feathers are replaced once every year. They're a lot more expensive to make, but they tend to be more durable and stronger. This is actual Iceland gull here. This is a bird that we found dead in Michigan. You can see the contrast between the first primary and the first secondary. Is everybody able to make that out? Here's the first primary, and here's the first secondary. And if you count out from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you have the 10 primaries on a gull. So the next time somebody says P8 or P9 or P10, your eyes know exactly where to go. Do the coverts have more wear and tear? Yes, generally speaking, these coverts take more of a beating than the flight feathers, okay? But with that said, some of these outer primaries take a pretty good beating too, because they're air resistance and they're the longest feathers. They're more exposed to the elements when the bird is at rest. So if you recall, when the bird was resting, some people thought that was the tail. The primaries that you're seeing sitting over the tail are generally P6 out to P10. All right, so when that bird is resting on a beach somewhere, you're usually seeing these 4 or 5 primaries sitting over the tail. So they're exposed more to the elements. They also get more worn and faded, as well as the coverts. Hey, really quick, what are these feathers called? Yes, those are the secondaries. And the innermost feathers here are actually called the tertials. These are the scapulars right here, sitting on the back. I'll probably end with this. The scapulars, folks, think of a bird as having a wing dangling off the body. And the body somehow needs to be streamlined. There has to be something that closes up that gap between the wing and the body. This is what the scapulars do. Okay, these feathers right here. I'm going to change the color if you don't mind. I'm going to make this blue. So these scapulars right here, they close up the gap between the bird's body and the wing. If you were to take those scapulars and rip them out, pluck them, there would be a gap between the bird's body and the wing. So the scapulars as well streamline flight. They close up that entire upper wing for the bird to have efficient flight. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop here. You have a lot of terminology to think about. You have large gulls to think about, small gulls to think about. First and foremost, go out and watch some gulls, right? All of this will mean nothing if you don't go out and apply it and look at some birds and try to point out the feather tracks and try to age these birds. Think about their size and structure. How do they compare to everything else in the flock? Is the bill thin? Is the bill bulbous? Does it seem to have long wings, wide wings? And I hope that this gives you stuff to think about. Do gulls hang out with terns? They certainly do. The smaller ones do more than the larger ones. So things like little gull, Bonapartes, Sabins, you'll find them with terns on a regular basis. They tend to migrate with some of the terns, with common terns and Forster's terns, black terns. Yes, so smaller gulls do hang out with terns. Ring-billed gulls, laughing gulls, maybe with Caspian terns, the bigger terns. Gullby, yes. Okay. Katie, do you want to formally open it up for questions, or should we continue to use the chat?
Sure. If we have any questions, please, does anyone have any questions that they have not typed in the chat? See, I'm looking in the chat here. Questions. We're having some gull puns here in the chat. I saw that. The goalpost and the gull by. All right, what do you guys got? Anybody got any formal questions for? Oh, here we got a question about how long have you been studying gulls?
What is this? 2021 now?
Yes, finally.
Probably a little under 15 years, I would say. But it's been it's been nothing but gulls. My mom likes to say I have a PhD in gulls. I don't know if that's true at all, but I am working on a gull guide, a gull identification guide, and I hate to announce it so early because it's still about a year and a half out. Princeton University is publishing the guide, and it's a gull ID guide on species of North America, hybrids, vagrants. But to answer the question, roughly 15 years.
You'll have to let us know for sure when that's going to come out, because I think that would be very helpful, because you're right. It definitely deserves its own book.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Oh, you'll know because I'll be blasting it on Facebook.
Awesome.
That's cool.
I think someone wants to know, are kittiwake gulls, are they a different group, or is it just historical names?
Yeah, kittiwakes are definitely gulls. There's two species of kittiwakes. They are highly pelagic. They're in their own genus, the Risa genus, Rissa. Incidentally, they're the only gulls that don't have the word gull in their name, but no, they're certainly gulls. The black-legged kittiwake, as I mentioned, is the most abundant gull in the world. It happens to be great blackback gull's most distant gull relative. I don't know if that made any sense. So these great blackback gulls that you guys see on the Atlantic, black-legged kittiwake and great blackback gull are the most distantly related gulls. So they seem to have far lineages from one another. I don't know, was there a second part to that question? Are they gulls? They're certainly gulls.
Yeah, I think it was asking if they're a different group, or was it just a historical name? But I think you may have covered that in your answer. We do have someone that wants to know, you mentioned that when you first are approaching Gull ID, you should approach from the tail, and then what? Maybe they couldn't remember what you said. They want you to give them some hints on how to approach identifying a gull, I guess, how to break it down.
In retrospect, that comment was interesting. I think for a beginning birder, to be completely honest, when you look at a gull, there probably isn't one part of the gull that's more important than the other. I've been doing this for so long that my brain immediately goes here, guys, when I see a young gull like this. Is it dark primaries? Are the tertials patterned? But just as important is to look at the bill, right? Some people will tell you, no, you start with the head. All young gulls will start with dark eyes, right? So that's not a supporting field mark. That's not a diagnostic field mark. All gulls begin with these kind of fleshy colored legs. When we're talking about the large gulls, that is. So I kind of just brush right over the head. I brush over the legs, and I go straight to the primaries and tertials. So the question exactly was, help me out here.
It's if you when you're first learning to ID gulls, size is one that you said, but she said beyond, or he or she said beyond size, what is the next thing? And you said maybe from the tail. So I guess what you're saying is the legs and the head or the eyes are very similar in most of the species. So maybe looking at the primaries
Yes.
and the bill are the best things.
Yes. So are these primaries black? Are they brown? Do they have pale edging? Do they have like notable, prominently pale tips? The bill, is it a straight bill versus does it have a big gonies angle? I'll explain gonies angle here. This is another term that's used with Gull ID. This is the gonies right here. See that little bend there, that little angle? And some gulls tend to have larger gonies than others. Western gulls out in California on the West Coast have this bulbous looking tip. It's very a deep gonies angle. Herring gulls, compared to lesser blackback gulls, have deeper gonies angles. So lesser blackback, which this bird is on the slide here, it doesn't tend to have a very deep gonies. It tends to have mostly a more straight bill, if you will. So comparing bill size, bill shape, because those are different things, right? Size and shape are different things. If I say it has a big bill, that means it's probably thick and long. If I say it has a deep bill, well, that could be just along the gonies, right? You look right here and see how deep is that gonies expansion. Primaries, again, look at color, look at pattern on the tertials. These are solid brown centered tertials, okay? And that's kind of what I expect to see on many herring gulls. That's kind of what I expect to see on many lesser blackback gulls. But when you get into more interesting things like California, Iceland gulls, they tend to have more patterned tertials. All right. And that all, again, ties back to looking back here, looking at the vent region. Is that barred? Is that white? Just kind of taking in the entire back of the bird. I hope that helps.
Amar, you had a slide, I think, where you had some of the more traditional gulls when people think of gulls, and it had the herring gull, the lesser black-backed gull.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where that slide was. Someone was asking that they're more of a beginner to gulls in our area, and what are some common gulls that they would see. And so, I mean, I think that, is the herring gull, the greater blackback gull, the lesser black-backed gull. Out of those in our area would be some to really look at. And then, the laughing gull, the ring-billed gull, when you look at the
Yeah, definitely these three that you pointed out, Katie. Herring gull, probably number one right now that you're seeing on the coast.
yes.
Great blackback gull and lesser blackback gull.
Mm-hmm.
Those would definitely be the large ones to know, those three.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And ring-billed, yes. And Laura saying the ring-billed, yes. The ring-billed was not on this slide, I guess. I don't know if it was on another slide, but we have a lot of the ring-bills.
Oh yeah, definitely ring-billed gull is our most widespread gull. Everyone should know ring-billed gull. That one is a 3-year species, but we can put it on here. Mm-hmm. Ring-billed gull is a key species for comparison to other species. Definitely know that one. That's a common one.
Great. All right. Well, thanks. And then the other one I know we have in our area, the laughing gull. I know that was on a different slide that you showed, and the Bonapartes. Yeah.
So I think it'd probably be most helpful to go back to this slide.
Mm-hmm.
and point those out. Ring-billed, herring,
Mm-hmm.
Bonapartes for the 2-year gulls,
Mm-hmm.
definitely from that column. Great blackback gull, lesser blackback gull, and laughing gull, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers the question. Rick answered a question with some of the ones that he should be looking for. And those are, you know, in this area is a good place
Yeah.
to start.
Laughing gull is your summer gull. You're going to have that gull around
Mhm.
a good amount of the year. Ring-billed gull should be around a good amount of the year.
Yes.
Great blackback herrings.
Great. Well, let's see. Does anyone else have any final questions there for Amar? We are recording this, and I just found out from Chono what we're going to be doing is after we are done with this recording, they're actually going to make it into a YouTube link that we can send out. That's going to be the best way to do it. It will take them about a day or two. So it'll probably be Monday or Tuesday before I can get that out to you guys, but it will be sent as a link to a YouTube video that you can then just go and watch that again. And did you, was there a link or something? Did I have a link, Amar?
Yes, let me put this in the chat for everyone.
Okay, Amar is getting ready to put something in the chat for everyone.
Anythinglaris.com. That website was called Anything Laris back when most of these gulls belonged to Laris. About 12 years ago, they did this rehauling of most of the gulls. So a lot of these species used to belong to Laris, and they moved them out into those 11 genera that I was talking about earlier to kind of show the diversity in gulls. But anythinglaris.com. Thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll visit the website there.
Well, thanks, Amar, so much for joining us and for teaching us all about gulls, because it's something we definitely see where we're located here. So we definitely see a lot of them. Somebody wants to make sure that this presentation is going to make us all gullible, more gullible.
You will definitely be more gullible. You mentioned, you guys have gulls, and I think this talk had a lot more meaning for me than when I do these talks for somebody, say, in Kansas. No offense to my friends in Kansas or Iowa, but they're not entirely landlocked. It's just harder for them to see these many species. You guys are kind of fortunate because you just never know what's going to be found on the ocean. Sabin's gulls will sometimes drop in, little gulls, black-headed gulls. So you got a lot of neat things out there. You just got to get out there and find it and enjoy it.
Well, thanks so much, Amar, and thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we will be sending out the links when we get them together. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.